well by now. I'll be very surprised. But of course, we are operating under this note well. Welcome to the extra session at IETF 109 virtually in Bangkok. We have a couple of submitted documents that I'd like to just do a status check on, and then we have 3 work items to talk about, and we'll finish by reviewing our milestones. So looking across at those couple of documents.
Ron, can I quickly interrupt you? Who is taking notes?
I'll probably take notes, actually. I have the session open to do that.
All right, then. Just want to make sure that nothing is lost.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we want to look at the documents. So we have Fetch Preview and Civ Mailbox ID that are both sitting submitted for publication and in Area Director follow-up. So Barry, if you are available to talk to what's happening there, that would be great. I know with Civ Mailbox ID, the most recent thing on that. Yep, go ahead.
Which one? The Fetch Preview? Okay, I mean, I guess what status of that is I need to go look at it. So let me do that while we're having this meeting, and I'll get back to you.
Cool. Yeah, I think the Fetch Preview is pretty much ready to go. The big discussion point with Civ Mailbox ID was how to deal with the case where you specified a Mailbox ID and a special use in the same document. So in that case, what I said to do in there was to resolve Mailbox ID first because it is the most explicit and exact thing. And then to go and follow the special use process, which includes creating a new mailbox with that special use if it doesn't exist. But it's basically binding the Mailbox ID most tightly, which I think does actually also make most sense because it's the most explicit thing, but it is very unlikely that anybody would ever specify both.
Well, and that's really my question, that it doesn't make sense to me to specify both, and it would make me happier, although I'm not going to hold out on this one too long, but I wanted to have the discussion. It would make more sense to me to say that you can't put them together, because in the one case you're looking for a specific mailbox by ID, and in the other case you're looking for a function. And it just doesn't make sense to put them both in the same command.
Yeah, I guess the question is whether the answer there should be don't do it and it's not allowed, or don't do it, but if it does happen, then here's how it works.
I would prefer to say don't do it, it's not allowed. But as I said, I'm not going to hold out on it once we have the discussion. Does anyone, I guess what I'd like to ask is, does anyone have a use case where it actually makes sense to specify both? Including a use case where you want to be tolerant of certain errors and it makes sense to do that, which I don't see it, but if someone wants to speak up for that, please.
So what is the semantic of this going to be? Do you have to, it has to be both have the ID and the special use?
No, it's the other way around. The idea is that if you're using Mailbox ID, it doesn't make sense to put special use on also. And if you're using special use, it doesn't make sense to put Mailbox ID on. They're completely different things that don't work together.
No, I understand. I was just trying to think of if we are to leave the combined, allow the combination of the two, what the semantic is going to be.
The semantics, if we leave it, would be that if the Mailbox ID exists, then you use it. Otherwise, you fall back to the special use.
Yeah, and the most complex thing was this example here where there's create as well. In which case, if nothing existed, it would create a new mailbox with the archive special use, but it would not get the same mailbox ID.
And that specific one sounds like it really would be an implementation issue. It would complicate implementations. I mean, you have to check for the mailbox ID existing, then you have to
Yep.
check for the special use existing, and then you decide whether you're going to create something. But what you create, I guess, would have the special use attached to it, but would be a different
Yes.
mailbox ID. It all seems
But it
like
would have the same name.
it seems much better to me to say that it does not make sense to put them both together, and it's an error if you do.
I'm happy to do that as well. I think I can't think of a reasonable case where you would have to have both. I guess it's a nice fallback in the case where that mailbox gets deleted, that it would get recreated with the special use. But if it gets deleted and then something creates something with that special use already, then it will file into there without having to create a new one. And this is, I'm thinking kind of on my feet here, but the example I'm thinking of is that you had the file into with the specific mailbox ID defined just because your system automatically does that, but you also say that the purpose is as a sent folder. And then, because you might want to tie other things to that mailbox ID in your Civ management system as well. And then if someone went ahead and deleted that mailbox and then another client created a new mailbox with that special use, you wouldn't necessarily want to go ahead and create it yourself in your script because it had been created by another client in the meantime.
And what if you cross the international date line? I mean, it starts to...
I mean, the answer there is to make your Civ generation script not use the mailbox ID if it's for a file into by use.
Let's see what Ken has to say.
It's going to work it away.
I think I'm leaning towards Barry's suggestion of making them mutually exclusive and they cannot be used together, especially in light of the fact that we have a test for both if the mailbox ID exists and a special use exists. So you can write a script that will handle both cases just by using the tests, as opposed to having everything jammed into one action.
All right, I will go ahead and
I think you convinced me
to say that.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Done. And you're going to read through Fetch Preview, which means we're now on to the next item in our agenda, which is IMAP 4 Rev 2. Alexi, you're welcome to share slides yourself if you want, or I can manage them for you.
If you manage them for me, that would be great. Thank you.
Cool.
So we do have Murray here, so that's great. Quick update. There were, I think there were like 3 revisions since July. Finishing, move to the next slide. Finishing comments from Stefan, as well as catching few other remaining things like list of recommended extensions and stuff. Next slide, please.
Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, so Arn pointed out that the text in the at the front of the document was still talking about sort of changes in RFC 3501, which is previous version, so needed to be adjusted. I didn't quite go all the way with unsuggestions to list everything that changed, but I think I added enough pointers, so hopefully this is clear. Few clarifications. I've noticed that start TLS description, command description was saying that it can return bad if command is not recognized. Well, how can it be not recognized if it's here? So that sort of sounded like a silly case. But there is a more useful one, which is if somebody issues start TLS when TLS is already active, whether just repeated start TLS or on TLS port. So this now is clear that this returns bad. We had several. There were several remaining issues from last IETF about making sure that list responses are mandatory for selected and examine. So this is fixed and examples were updated. If people can sanity check examples, that would be great. Some clarification. There was some old text about UID next and UID validity about what the behavior is if they're not there. At the same time, they are mandatory elsewhere in the text, so it wasn't entirely consistent. So I think, yeah, I basically deleted the old text. And we also added some text about how mailbox canonicalization, whether it's due to normalization or some other kind of mapping rules, can be done, and how this is returned in list responses for when mailboxes get deleted, when mailboxes get renamed, like to specify that client issued this name, but now new name is, something else. So here's text about that. I think that's all changes. Oh, actually, no, I think there is another slide. Next slide, please. Yes, there were a few more things. We had discussion last IETF that whether to clarify that each search with the currently specified options like min, man, max, count, and all, whether it's allowed to return multiple search responses that have to be amalgamated, and now the document says that that's not allowed. You can write an extension which allows for that, but you'll need to specify this explicitly. Some editorial changes, moving section specification into a new subsection, and referencing it elsewhere in the text. There were several comments from Stefan about like for well-formed messages, it's clear what the date should be, what in envelope, and various other places. So there is now more clarity about how this handle formal formed or draft messages. So like when you return empty strings, when you return nils and stuff like that. Next, now there is a reference to TLS 1.3. The text is worded such that both are allowed in use. TLS 1.3 is recommended, but TLS 1.2 is still allowed, which I think is very similar to recommendations coming from TLS working groups anyway. I cleaned up Appendix D. There were like I was supposed to list all the pending changes as well as changes made since. I rationalized it. I think I removed everything that was done now because we're really late in the process, and there shouldn't be any open issues about that. And then there is a new section about recommended extensions. I'll revisit this very quickly today just to make sure that people are comfortable. For now, it mentioned quick resync, constore, and object ID, but we can discuss if people want to add something else. Next slide, please. Right. I was checking my notes and I was like, I thought I did everything. And then I found out that there was some changes in relationship to supporting 64-bit message sizes. I forgot to do this change. I think I or somebody or chairs should probably still double check on the mailing list that people are happy to go with this, because this your servers don't have to support this, but the clients always have to support this because they have to accommodate bigger message sizes, basically, or body part sizes. That shouldn't take very long. I had a separate draft on this, which was parked a few years back. So this is mostly just ABNF fixes to allow for bigger sizes. If you have opinions one way or the other, please shout. I double-checked with Timo Sirainen yesterday. He said that his server already supports 64-bit message and body part sizes, so he will be quite happy with this change. And from notes from our previous meeting, I think Bron was happy with this as well. But if somebody really doesn't like it, please let me know.
Yeah, the only challenge with it is what happens if you have a message in your store which is more than 32 bits and a non-IMAP4 Rev2 client connects. Does it get a truncated version? Does the message not appear to it? And how does that work?
And we haven't solved this problem.
No. Particular trick is if you connect us an IMAP4 Rev1, do some queries, decide to upgrade to IMAP4 Rev2, and suddenly UIDs appear that were not present as Rev1. So it does mean that you need to treat Rev1 and Rev2 as completely separate for caching message ID number purposes if you're going to have messages that disappear and reappear depending which mode you're in.
This is going to be very tricky, to be honest.
So, I mean, the main thing is to say either always use IMAP4 Rev2 or never use IMAP4 Rev2 with the same server. Don't mix them.
Yes, which is probably a good advice anyway.
Yeah, so it might be worth putting specific suggestion for that in the text. Clients should not, on pain of confusion, mix the two.
Okay.
Because there'll be
Can
naming
you make
issues
sure
as well.
this is in the notes, please? So that we don't forget. And I think, yeah, we might need to discuss the whole concept of hiding some messages which are too big to be exposed, how this is going to work. However, irrespective of this question, I think the document, as far as our responsible ID is concerned, I think Murray can just review the document as is. Once this is implemented, this will be a very, very small patch to the draft. So Murray, don't make it stop you from reviewing the document.
No problem. This is, remind me, is this going through another working group last call, or did that close already?
That should be closed.
Okay.
Yep, the working group last call is finished. I was just checking if there's anything to... I would have submitted it a couple of weeks ago, but life got in the way. And then I thought, we're going to be talking about it now anyway. I'll submit it after this, just in case some last minute thing comes up.
Okay, yeah. When it goes into publication requested, that's when I'll be able to finish it. It otherwise doesn't get my attention as easily as stuff on pending telechats. So.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my request. Can this be put into publication requested? I think we discussed this maybe even a couple of months ago.
Yep, we can do that. I wasn't sure if this was the final version to do it, but I can certainly go ahead and do that now. It's the last call has expired and there's been no feedback on that.
All right. Next slide, just to triple check. Fairly new section about recommended extensions. Do people have any feelings about whether we should mention ACL and multi-mailbox search, or anything else for that matter?
I don't have strong opinions on that. Fuzzy's already in, which is the main thing in search that I really care about. But certainly, I mean, recommending is pretty lightweight. It's not a requirement.
Yeah, I suppose writing a client, I found bits of ACL spec to be useful. For example, some clients issue my rights very frequently just to see whether they're allowed to do various operations. So I would be weekly suggesting to add ACL to the list. Just as a, obviously it might not work for access control models for some mail stores, but if you do it, do it this way kind of thing.
Yep. That makes sense, and list return my rights as well.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of including ACL.
All right. Multi-mailbox search, I think it's a great functionality. I'm not sure how widespread it is, so maybe not just yet. But if you have an opinion, please come to the mic.
It doesn't hurt either way as far as I'm concerned, because it's just recommended. So you do it or you don't do it, depending how you feel as a server implementer.
Yeah, well, I did add some weekly words in the document saying that if you don't see your favorite extension here, it doesn't mean that it's not recommended. So just to make sure that people don't think that these are, more blessed than others. But I'm happy to add it if people are using it.
We aren't. We're doing other evil stuff that's mostly JMap these days.
Right. Okay. Is this the last slide? I think.
One more, I think. Next steps.
I'm
Done.
We're done.
Awesome. All right, then I will submit it. Apologies if you can hear the noisy helicopter that's just come over my house.
We cannot.
Excellent. I have a very high quality microphone. It collects things at my mouth and not much else, which is fantastic because it's super loud for me.
So just back on Fetch Preview, I put in an RFC editor note for a small edit that we had talked with Rob Wilton about and that Michael hadn't put in. But other than that, it's fine. So I gave it the final approval. You should see it going to the RFC editor queue anytime.
Great, thank you. Cool. Then we are done with IMAP4 Rev 2, and we are well ahead of schedule at the moment. But I guess we may as well move on to our next topic, which is quota. So Alexei, welcome back.
Yeah, I was, my apologies for, I just posted a 03 yesterday because I haven't done much on it. But changes are fairly simple. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so I was debating this for a very long time about whether the document specifies status deleted and status deleted storage, which is number of deleted messages and total size of deleted messages. I was sort of debating for months with myself whether they should be tied to specific capabilities, as in, if your server supports quota on message numbers, then you should support status deleted. I didn't get much feedback on this, but I thought I'll just go ahead and go with it and make it slightly easier to implement. Obviously, if you do both already, that makes no change. Doesn't make any difference for you. But if you are thinking about implementing one and not the other, then it makes it slightly easier to implement on the server side. And the idea of status deleted and status deleted storage is client can ask the question, how much space can I free to get underwater, for example, this sort of thing. That's the point of that. Next slide. Oh, yeah. That's actually possibly a question about AMAP4F2. Basically, syntactic issue is that response codes are not allowed to have close square bracket, and tags are at the moment allowed to have this. Do people have a strong opinion either way? On one hand, we can tighten definition of tag to disallow this, but if there is any client that decides to generate tags with this, then they will become non-compliant with this change. I'm slightly apprehensive about it.
Yeah. Clients, man.
Mythical
I would be pretty happy to say once you've enabled IMAP4Rev2, you're not allowed to use that in tags. But the problem is, what do you do for IMAP4Rev1 clients? Do they not have this overquota supported? Is it something that only gets turned on in IMAP4Rev2? Or do you not generate them if the tag is bogus?
Yeah, I suppose we can say that, it will work most of the time, as in, unless you have a stupid tag, it will work. Overquota has actually two forms. One is just overquota with no tag. It means, for the current operation. And overquota space tag is for cases where you're moving message like from one mailbox to another. You sort of want to know whether your current one is overquota or the destination one, so it helps a little bit. How important is this, do people think? As in, to convey this information that overquota relates to a specific command, as opposed to the current mailbox.
I don't think it's generally going to be important. If you're doing a move operation, then overquota is very likely to be the destination, and regardless, your response to getting an overquota message is going to be to tell the user, hey, you can't do that. You hit a quota limit. And you can then poll the quotas at the various locations if you want to check what happened.
Okay. So actually, purist in me sort of just like this, but I think you answered my question that it's probably just drop this feature and don't bother with this. Avoid all sort of complications. Fine, let's do that. Unless I hear otherwise, I'll do this in the next revision. I think that's it. What's the next? Is there more slides to this? I don't remember now.
Future directions.
Yeah, my usual questions, basically. Anything missing, anything should be removed. I think this is ready for working group last call.
Cool. Should I do that with the next document where the overquota space tag's been removed?
Fine.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can always upload that during. Yeah, I can start the working group last call now. And just note that you'll be uploading one more version of the document that will have this minor edit.
Yes, that would be my preferred solution if you're happy with this.
Cool. Done. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Alexi. Our next topic is JMAP Civ Snooze from Ken.
Okay, so the first revision 00 pretty much encapsulates what we have implemented and are using at FastMail at this moment. Next slide, if you want to move forward, please. So what are we talking about here? So it's basically a civ action that postpones the filing of a message to a later point in time, which essentially means that it behaves very much like a file into, which is delayed to some point in the future. The draft is somewhat vague on the actual mechanics of how snooze works, but it does discuss that this could be done either via a special IMAP mailbox or via SMTP. Currently, we use a special mailbox at FastMail. Next slide, please. So here's the current syntax. There's one required argument, which is a list of times in hour, minute, second format. Along with that, there's a time zone ID string, which is IANA time zone ID. There's a list of weekdays using strings, but they're digits from 0 to 6 that borrows from Ned's date draft. And finally, there's a destination mailbox that you want the message to appear in once it has awakened from its snooze. Next slide, please. So basically, the combination of weekdays and times forms a chronological list of awakened times. So when a message arrives, it gets snoozed until the next awakened time in that list. So a couple quick examples. Obviously, if you've got something that's Monday through Friday, awakened times of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., the message arrives at 8 a.m., it'll awaken the same day at 9. If it arrives at 3, if it arrives at noon, it'll awaken at 3 the same day. And similarly, if it arrives after 3 p.m. on Monday, it'll show up the following Tuesday. And if it shows up on the weekend, late Friday or Saturday or Sunday, it would show up on Monday. Pretty straightforward in that respect. Next slide, please. So we also support, with our current implementation, these various extensions. So if you have IMAP4 flags, you can specify an add flags and remove flags option, which will set and unset flags when the message is awakened. You can use the IMAP4 flags with the variables. If you want to set something at snooze time, that's done via the internal variable. So there'd be via set flag or add flag actions separately. Additionally, going back to one of our earlier conversations, we actually support create, special use, and mailbox ID. I will certainly update this draft to discuss that mailbox ID and special use are mutually exclusive in that respect. But in any case, all three of those options have to do with the awaken mailbox, not the snooze mailbox. Next slide, please. So it was mentioned on the list by Stefan, I believe. He asked why this is a separate action versus just being additional parameters or arguments on keep and file into, which seems like a logical discussion to have. Two questions are, what's the syntax going to look like? And more importantly, at least for our use case, how do you specify flags to be set at snooze time and at the awaken time? Next slide, please. In terms of syntax, I think there are three possible options, maybe more. If someone on here has alternate solutions, I'm open to hearing them. So we could just jam all the additional arguments in line with the existing file into arguments. But if you've got something that's going to support, the times, the weekdays, the time zone ID, create, and special use, the list of arguments is going to get pretty unwieldy, kind of what we already have with FCC. I did some digging around the ABNF for Civ itself, and it appears as if, even though it might be ugly, we could use the test list syntax at the end of a command, which appears to be legal. So there's an example there of what this may look like. It kind of encapsulates all the snooze specific stuff into its own parenthesis, its own structure at the very tail end. Don't know how people feel about that. Additionally, on the next slide, it also looks like we could use a block at the end of file into or keep, which also appears to be legal per the syntax. This seems a little bit cleaner to me, but again, it may confuse some parsers, not sure. I actually haven't tried it with our parser to see how this would work. It's also somewhat confusing in that, in this case, snooze really isn't its own command. It's just a way of parameterizing file into. Any comments or suggestions on making this a separate, or making this part of keep a file into and how to do the syntax?
What is the advantage of making it part of keep or file into, other than reusing the name, I guess?
I don't see any per se, but I'm open to hearing any arguments.
When people list interactions with other actions, this is less likely to be forgotten if it's already an existing action. That, I know it might not be a strong argument, but the fewer actions we have, the easier it is to list how you interact with all of them.
This is true.
Can you remind me why you want flags to be both at the snooze time and then at delivery time?
I could let Neil make that argument if he wants to jump in. Otherwise, I'll go ahead.
Sure. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so basically at delivery time, the flags are set as per any normal stuff, so you might mark red or pin or whatever. But then at awaken time, we set a particular $new flag so that we can mark out those messages, especially when they move back to your inbox. And then when you actually open the message, we clear that flag. Because conversations amalgamate different messages, some of which may be snoozed, they also amalgamate keywords, and so that could lead to that's basically so you could leak out even while it's still in the snooze folder because it might be threaded with other messages. I guess in theory you could set it when you snooze, but I think it's safer to do it when you wake it up, because you could again have more client logic to exclude stuff that's currently snoozed from the keywords kind of amalgamation within a thread. But that's the reasoning.
The other issue we have in our implementation is because we actually have a snooze mailbox that an IMAP client can see, the user could fiddle with flags and change something that they may want to have set or unset when it actually does get awakened, right?
Yeah, but this is really you're expecting user to sort of project how this is working for your implementation. If they mess with flags, they probably know what they're doing.
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends which flags. Obviously, clients make it very easy to change things like the scene flag and flag, etc. Yeah, I can have. I'll bring up the code now and have a quick look. But it might be okay if you only set them on delivery. But I'd have to double check all the things we do to see if that is going to work.
I just see this as an option that users are likely to confuse themselves with. I don't object to having it, but I can't imagine actually using it. And I can see if you don't use it very carefully, you're going to wind up getting some parts of a conversation delivered right away and others snoozed, which probably isn't what you really meant to have. So,
I mean, as long as if all the messages are actually delivered to a mailbox, it's delivered to a snoozed mailbox, and the conversation view in your client shows all of them, then you won't like miss some that were snoozed earlier if somebody else comes in. Like that's actually a valid use case. If like you normally you would snooze it because if it's from a mailing list you don't care about too much, but if it comes from a particular person who you do care about, you don't want that to be snoozed. That conversation will now show up in your inbox, and the previous messages from people you don't normally care so much about that were snoozed will still be in the thread for you to get the context.
that depends upon whether your client is threading them that way, and not all clients do.
That's true. That's presuming they thread across mailbox, not just within a mailbox.
So it might be worth putting something like that in as non-normative text in the document somewhere of maybe implementation considerations. Just warning that this can cause some funny things depending on how the client displays the messages. That's all.
Yeah, I brought this up on the list. That there's some security implications here, and they vary pretty dramatically depending on how you implement this. If you implement it like using a future release sort of mechanism, then the messages aren't visible at all anywhere until they're unsnoozed, and that has some really, I think, potentially serious implications, to users. And if you use the mailbox trick where you put them in one and then switch them to another, you get different behavior. But the other thing, when you use those different tricks, the delivery dates are going to be very different, and the threading situation is going to be different. Lots of potential for confusion here.
Yeah, I mean, we deliberately go with the deliver to a special mailbox one, which I think solves most of these problems. The delivery date is the regular delivery date because it's not delivered late. It's threaded in with all the other messages immediately. If you want to go find it, you can search for it and everything else. I think the reason the specs kind of more open on that.
Maybe the right thing to do is that's how you have to implement it. If that's if that solves
Perhaps,
all the problems, solve it.
Yeah, I think it was the spec was written this way to just try and make it easier to accommodate for if there's existing systems doing something different. But having said that, I don't think any I know of are doing a delayed delivery. But please correct me if someone knows about one that is implementing this in a different way.
Well, the point is that regardless
you don't know, you have no way of predicting what people are going to do in the future. If someone publishes an RFC and they already have, future release, that's just a logical way to implement it.
I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I was saying. Sorry.
The issue that Ned and I are bringing up isn't that we shouldn't do this, but that you need to say more in the document to guide people who are implementing it on what the pitfalls are. And, you can say that if this is implemented this way, it works better than if it's implemented that way or something like that. But without that, you might get some very weird implementations that could cause problems.
Yeah, and you've got a security issue either way because people, average users aren't going to know to look for some special snooze mailbox. It isn't even going to occur.
Daniel's been in the queue for a while too, so let's not forget.
Sorry, who's?
Daniel Gilmore is in queue. Just talk.
Isn't he's been speaking?
Yeah. So I have
You're very soft.
Yeah, you're very faint.
Still very soft.
Okay, hopefully this is. I want to second that what other folks are saying I think is right on, that we should think about how this is going to actually perform for the user. I think Barry's concerned that like if someone's setting flags that they know what they're doing is maybe not correct. What we're specifying here is not actually something that's like a user-facing feature. This is like a mechanism that I would imagine good mail clients will use to implement something that the user is going to understand, right? Like they'll have a snooze button in it, and they'll choose one standard set of behaviors, and they'll implement and they'll encode that maybe via a recursive command on the back end, but the user is not going to be like crafting what these specific options are, right? That just seems unlikely to me. So I think that kind of guidance for mail user agent implementers is going to depend on what the backends actually do. And so I think that this idea that we'll make it generic and you can do arbitrary backends isn't actually a safe thing to specify. So I support the idea of saying that this is, you really shouldn't do this with SMTP, delayed delivery or anything like that.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. I also think it makes sense because if this is just for basically creating rules that snooze. If you're going to implement snooze like manually for a user, you're going to need a special folder for that anyway. The messages have already been delivered. So it's much better to use a single mechanism than to have two different mechanisms of doing snooze, depending on whether it's on delivery time or manually afterwards. I just had another quick look at what we're doing. The reason we want to be able to set flags on awaken time, the main one is some users set that they want it to be marked unread when it's awakened, but they don't want it to be marked unread immediately because they might have a view that shows all unread mail they currently have, and so you don't want it showing up there until it's been snoozed.
Maybe include that as an example, right? I mean, as you're writing this draft, we're thinking about how implementers are likely to use it, and just having a two-sentence example of this is one way that you can use it might be useful guidance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Without example like this, there is quite a lot of extra complexity that this draft is proposing, which is like, I think I'm just about to be convinced that it might be worth it, but please add an example at least.
Yeah, I definitely would probably lean towards, I think, mandating you use special mailbox, not future release, and let's register, if we've not already, the role for the IMAP, JMAP roles, was it special use registry?
Yes. Like, yeah. We need a new attribute.
I'm fine with that, pending any strong objections to leaving it open-ended like it is now.
As far as syntax is concerned, the one on the screen, I think it's very cute, but it's sort of, I'm concerned that it will break quite a few parsers. It might not be a bad thing, if your parser doesn't know about it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that comes down to whether we want to make this its own action or roll it into keep and file into, right? So I think that's the first decision we made, and then if we decide to go with the keep and file into, we have to settle on the syntax.
Right.
Do you have any strong opinions on that, Alexei, or no?
I have slight preference for using file into, but then it comes with, so you're saying it comes with extra syntax complexity. No. I don't know.
Or you have a lot of extra arguments that will snooze, add flags, snooze, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, as Neil said, it's not really making it more complex. It's just making it unwieldy with the number of options that can be in there. And I guess I don't like the fact that you've got a set of flags, or a set of options that apply to one particular functionality that could be spread all over the place, right? Because
I think the difficulty
by definition, the tags are unordered. So, you could have these things intermingled with any other file into argument, like we have with FCC, which, after having written that and implemented it, it just looks kind of ugly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be cleaner as a separate command because you have multiple arguments you need for the snooze. And as Ken said, if they're intermixed with other arguments, and they only make sense if you, like, a snooze add flags argument only makes sense if you have a separate snooze argument. So it's invalid if you have one or the other. It seems cleaner to me to have a separate command. But I don't really care what the syntax is hugely. That's just my view.
Sort of tangentially related to this, do we have a IAM registry for action? If action is equal to
There's a registry for the extensions, but not specifically for actions, I don't believe.
It's just an extensions registry. I mean, an extension can define 1 action, 0 actions, 50 actions.
I know, but it would be nice, even if you're writing new, like if you're considering interactions, or look up an action and find out all the RFCs update being mentioned and all of this.
Yeah, I get your point. It's a valid point that we didn't really think about the fact that things have to enumerate their interactions pretty thoroughly.
Ned, I know you've implemented a lot of the CIF stuff. Do you have any strong opinions on whether to make this its own separate action or to roll it into keep and file into?
I don't have a strong opinion. No, I really don't. There's arguments either way. I am a little concerned about the whole, using tricky syntax to do things. I wonder if, I can handle that in my implementation, but I have the ability to, evaluate arguments. Mine's essentially call by name is what it boils down to. And if your implementation works that way, you can probably handle this, but there probably are implementations that don't work that way.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, we're kind of limited by the fact that 5228 does not allow arguments to arguments. And these are the only two ways that could find even shoehorn stuff in.
Right, after
the separate command. I'm not. I mean, the way this will probably sound stupid, but basically what you do is you go through the code and look for all the places where you're looking around at file intos, and you make sure that they're looking at snoozes where it's appropriate. So it's not that hard to add, all of the to deal with all the interactions.
Right.
Again, that's how my implementation works. Who knows?
Yeah, that's how ours does too. It kind of treats file into and snooze as, equivalent actions with somewhat different semantics.
There's a bit there. What can I say?
I think after listening to this, I'm leaning towards let's do a separate action.
That's kind of what I'm hearing too.
And we can have a separate discussion, about registry for actions. That might be just a nice thing to do anyway.
I noted that as potentially a separate draft. Anyone want to volunteer to author that?
Well, I seem to care, so I think, yeah. But if somebody wants to help me out, it should be just a simple IAM registration. But
Cool. All right, I have noted that.
I don't think I have any more slides. I think the last slide was basically discussing what we've already discussed.
Yep, that's the final slide. All right.
Okay.
So I guess the next step is for you to go back and rewrite, having made it that it requires the message be placed into a folder somewhere that the user can see somehow, and creating the snoozed registration.
And I didn't quite follow. Is a snooze mailbox then a special use mailbox, a new kind of them? Okay.
Yes.
It's a new special use, so that will get registered.
Are we going to limit this to IMAP servers?
Well, it's just an app, for example.
I'm sorry, Lexi, I was talking over there. I didn't hear what you said.
Works just as well with JMAP.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah. My question was, we don't want to limit this to just IMAP servers. Obviously, you could make this work with a Maildir server as well, right?
Yeah, so we can make it that if you're using an IMAP or JMAP server, then you should file these messages into a mailbox with special use snoozed as registered here.
Right. And then, but people can still do it other ways. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe a silly argument, but if you use POP for access with Civ, then this will be just not something you can access probably until you get the message.
Just to be clear, we want to remove any hint of using SMTP to implement this from the draft, correct?
I think I've heard even more of a suggesting not to do that.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Okay, but we just want to discuss potential security issues and pitfalls in doing so.
Ideally, yes.
Okay, I'll craft some text along those lines, and then hopefully I can get some help with wordsmithing things that aren't clear or incomplete.
Great.
All right, thanks everyone.
The last thing that we have here is just to glance at our milestones. Looks like Civ AI we still need to come back to. Quota is there to be sent off. Timing's about right there. I'm at 402 will be submitted now. Civ mailbox ID has been submitted, so I can mark that one as done. And Civ snooze has been adopted, so I'll update that and mark that as done. I don't think we've got anything new to add there other than to adopt a document creating the Civ Actions registry. Do we have any other work that anyone wants this working group to be doing? That was a not really, because I suspect that given that we will finish this work off fairly early next year and we will be very quiet for a little bit, which I'm fine with, until being a working group that can take up issues as they come up in this space, because there's still plenty of action.
And how email core is going, that being quiet for a while is a good thing.
I agree. All right. Thanks, everybody. In that case, we've basically finished our time here. So go grab yourself some popcorn and a stiff drink and prepare for the plenary.
See you later. Ned, nice to hear your voice again.
Yeah.
Working this time. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.